having a hard time reading the first name.
Lauren Howard.
Lauren Howard. Sorry.
I think I will start. I'm Kent Singer. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Rural Electric Association. CREA is the trade association for the electric co-ops in Colorado. We have 22 distribution co-op members. All of the distribution co-ops in Colorado are members of CREA. Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association is also our member. The co-ops, the distribution co-ops in Colorado serve about 70% of the land mass of Colorado, but about 25% of the consumers. So we serve a pretty light density territory, as you've heard from some of the managers. We serve about 600 or 700,000 meters and about 1.2 or 3 million people. We are nonprofit, member-owned electric co-ops. Every co-op has a board of directors elected from its membership. Those co-ops, in turn, own Tri-State, and Dave and Rick will talk about Tri-State. I'm just going to make a few points here. I'm going to skip my prepared testimony and just go straight to some observations and points that I think I can clarify. Even after 5 hours of testimony, I don't think you have a clear picture yet of how this works. And it's because it's complicated. It's not because anybody has intentionally misled you. It's because they don't understand this statute like we do, because we've been dealing with it for 10 years. So let me just spell out how this works. Because there were statements earlier that today only the large co-ops have to meet the RPS. That is incorrect. Today, the large municipal utilities have to meet a 10% RPS. All the electric co-ops have a 10% RPS. This goes back to 2004 when Amendment 37 was passed by the voters on about a 53 to 47 vote in about 20 counties. A whole bunch of counties voted no. The initial proposal only applied the 10% standard to the investor-owned utilities and to the largest co-ops and municipal utilities. It only applied initially to 3 co-ops and a couple of the municipal utilities. 2007 comes around, and we had a lot of discussions with Governor Ritter's team. And when he came into office in 2007, we met with him and said, we think the co-ops, all of them, can do a 10% standard. They weren't required to prior to House Bill 1281 passing in 2007. It was only the largest co-ops, and 2 of those opted out. When the voters approved Amendment 37, they approved a ballot measure which only applied to the largest utilities in this state. And they gave the co-ops an option to opt out by election. So when the voters passed that ballot measure, they understood it should only really apply to the largest utilities who could afford to implement it. 2007 comes around, we said we can do 10%, and that's where we are today. All distribution co-ops must have 10% of their retail sales by 2020 in renewables. The 18 Tri-State members get that power supply from Tri-State. The 4 XL members get their power supply from XL. So now you have Senate Bill 252, which creates, frankly, this sort of crazy patchwork of different renewable standards for different utilities. It's no wonder you couldn't all figure it out. You have to understand the history of all of this to get this. So now, if Senate Bill 252 passed, XL would stay at its 30% in Black Hills. Black Hills and XL, the only 2 IOUs in the state, continue to 30% by 2020. The municipal utilities would stay at 10%. Only the largest municipal utilities, Fort Collins and Colorado Springs. The smaller munis don't have any RPS requirement. For the co-ops, the one co-op, Intermountain, would go to 25%. The 21 other co-ops stay at 10%. But the 18 of those 21 who are Tri-State members effectively have a 25% standard because their power supplier now has a 25% standard. So it's incredibly complicated. Like I said, there's no wonder you had struggled earlier in this hearing to understand this because it's very complicated. Had the sponsors come to us and asked about it, we could have explained that. I would have been happy to do that, but no one did. And we reached out multiple times asking the sponsors to talk to us about this bill, and that did not happen. So we've got this patchwork quilt of different standards applying to different utilities in Colorado if this bill were to pass. Now, another issue I wanted to talk about was this whole rate cap question. And there's been a lot of discussion about that this afternoon. And it is true that in the bill, it talks about a 2% rate cap. But as I read the bill, you've got a 2% rate cap that applies to the retail distribution co-ops, and I think it's another 2% on top of that for Tri-State, but frankly that is unclear. It's also unclear when that off-ramp can be invoked. the statute, the bill, is incredibly vague about this. It just says, well, if your retail guys have a 2% rate cap, then wholesale guy, Tri-State, you get to take advantage of that. But it doesn't say if one of them meets it, then you stop. If all of them have to meet it, then you stop. If it's an annual requirement, it doesn't explain that at all. And I'll tell you, the history of the rate cap in Colorado is far more complicated than my friend Ron Benz explained. There have been incredibly lengthy, complicated PUC dockets to figure out the rate cap for Excel. And there's been a lot of controversy about how that's calculated, and I could refer you to commission orders that you don't want to read that explain all of this. It is incredibly complicated. There are assumptions and inputs that you'd have to be a Public Utility Commission lawyer to understand. They exclude a lot of investments that PSCO made that do not count toward the rate cap. That's just a fact. And so when I hear someone talk about, well, the rate cap, that's the off-ramp, don't worry about it, I get very suspicious about that. It probably requires some sort of hearing at the commission or in court. Someone's going to challenge our invocation of the rate cap. And you heard Commissioner McFadden say she thought that ought to be something the Public Utilities Commission should take up. And for us, that's a nightmare. This whole bill, statute 40-2-124, which was created in 2004, now runs to 5,000 words. And we try to figure it out all the time, how to deal with it. Right now, it makes sense. We have to have 10% by 2020. And Dave and Rick are going to talk about the costs of this, but I just wanted to hit that rate cap issue. One thing we've not talked about is that the co-ops aren't opposed to renewable energy. I mean, that's a crazy notion. As Rich pointed out, if renewables can be integrated into our systems in an economic way, we're going to jump all over that. We've got co-ops doing solar farms and small hydro installations and coal mine methane and geothermal and smart metering all over this state because they understand how these systems work. They really honestly don't need a lot of help from you all to figure this out. And so we would ask that you kill this bill. There's no need for it. It's unfair. As you've heard before, it excludes some of the largest utilities in the state. And frankly, it's simply unworkable. And the last point I want to make with respect to Mr. Benz's testimony, because he sat up here and said that Tri-State doesn't care about the best interests of Colorado. I've never heard a statement quite like that made before in this committee or any committee. And I just want to guarantee you that all these folks sitting behind me are members of their co-ops. These co-ops own Tri-State, and you can be damn sure they care about the best interests of Colorado. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Singer? Senator Harvey?
Thank you. To that last point, your board members are elected by the members of the every co-op. Can
Correct.
you go into that, explain how that makes them somewhat have an interest in
Sure.
their citizens?
They actually, when we say they own the co-op, it's a fact. It's a legal requirement. They own equity in the co-op. When you pay your bill, the capital credits are allocated. You actually have an equity ownership in your co-op. You have a right to attend your co-op's board meetings. You have a right to run for your co-op board. And these co-ops have annual meetings where folks are elected on typically a 3-year term to their board. And all the co-op bylaws say you've got to be a member of the co-op to be eligible to run for the board of directors.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Singer. Who would like to go next?
Yes. Thank you, Mr.